We will now have a panel discussion, and I would like to invite the participants. We have Professor Varblane, who comes from the University of Tartu and is a professor of international business. Please have a seat. And we have Dr. Liina, who has an interesting background of both biology and theology and is coordinating the work of science advisors. And then Kevin Parnell, please come back. And also, as you know, Johannes Klumpers is not available, but his very able substitute, Robert Jan Smits, will join the fore. And to begin with, I would like to give a short an opportunity to the two persons who have not spoken up yet to give some of their thoughts to initiate the discussion. Perhaps ladies first. Should be on here.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be invited here. And I will give a very short overview about one possible options how to convert science into advice. And I will talk about the scientific advisors. We have been talking about them during this morning many times, so I try not to be duplicative, but rather add something. We consider this our success story. These positions of scientific advisors were created in order to help ministries to fulfill their task, to be responsible for organizing and funding R&D in their fields. And the actual fulfillment of this task has been very uneven. Some ministries do have their own R&D funding programs or an R&D organization, but some ministries are just ordering studies and surveys. So in the framework of a program RITA, that I'm managing, we finance the positions of scientific advisors in 10 ministries, as it was said in the morning by Angela. And
put the microphone a bit closer.
Okay, so now it's better. The first advisor started to work in 2015. Last ones will start in the end of this year. They must have a doctoral degree or at least 4 years of research experience. And currently, as it was said, most of them do have PhD degree, 65%. And as it was said in the morning, when one element for success is group of advisors with undisputable high reputation, that we consider that our advisors do have. And we can consider these advisors as honest brokers, but not the advocates or lobby group. So I think that they are rather honest brokers, according to the types what we heard in the morning. And even though it took a couple of years' time for ministries to recognize that the position can be beneficial, and some ministries were quite reluctant in the beginning, at the moment most of the ministries are very satisfied with these positions, even though it's a little bit too early to see any remarkable outcomes yet. But we can bring out a couple of points. First of all, these advisors compose a tight networks. They are cooperating. We organize meetings and trainings. We will evaluate each other's project proposals and share our R&D plans. This has led to common projects between different ministries and to sharing experience and knowledge. We have a fairly good overview about activities in different ministries. Advisors evaluate together. They have already evaluated together approximately 80 projects, proposals, and prepared more than 20 common projects, among others more than 1 million euros projects, and also some other smaller ones. Most of advisors have quite well established in their ministries, and due to them R&D is much more visible in their ministries. They have got quite a big attention. Some ministries that had previously not any R&D plans have started to develop them. Many ministries have organized more active cooperation with scientists. Some of them are also active at international levels, so they are more involved into international activities like GPI, Europe. And general feedback has been very positive, both from ministry side and from academia and other partners. Advisors act as a mediators between policymakers and scientists, starting from detecting R&D priorities, translating ministries' needs into terms of references, ordering studies, and bringing the results to the ministry officials. And in this work, previous experience in research is of utmost importance, so that's why we require this PhD degree, or at least experience in research previously. This system should be kept also alive later on after the end of the project, and it should be developed further also after this funding has been finished, as there is much potential yet for the advisors. But already now we can see that most of them are successful in converting science into advice in their everyday work in ministries. Thank you. That's everything from my side.
Thank you. And then Urmas, Varblane.
I am going to continue, but in time, basically, I go a bit back because I am going to talk about one project which was before these scientific advisors were recommended, or actually from the projects, which one outcome was that. And it is about a project called the Research and Innovation Policy Monitoring Program, which was commissioned by Ministry of Economic Affairs and Ministry of Education and Research 2011, and was 4 years. And that was in some case very novel project by our ministries, because one of the main tasks of that project was exactly to convert your knowledge into policy advice. And it was somehow also very educational to us as researchers, because we tried to, in that project, to think about the theory we have learned, but in the process we learned also many important things. And now if we are talking about the lessons, I would say several things. One thing is that you should have patience, you should have a long-term view. And many people in this audience know our discussion in Estonia about the problem. What will be the model for research funding? What is the proper proportion between so-called grant-based or competitive and fundamental basic institutional-based funding? And that was a discussion which was in our project, and not only ourselves, but where we tried to get different kind of allies and to create discussion. We were forced to, it was not only to persuade ministries, officials or politicians, it was partly also to persuade researchers, scientists themselves, because there are very different opinions. But what was the point? That in Estonia we had 90% grant-based or I would say competitive-based, and only 10% fundamental institutional. And that kind of balance was simply very unusual. And some people thought that it is very useful for them. And on the other hand, we tried to explain that in long run, we still should move more to the balanced approach. And now, when project already was finished, maybe even 2 years after that, we witnessed the change in the policy. And we are moving now already to that target. So that is, I think, one positive example of how, if you have patience enough, you will see that. And actually, the story here about science advisors or research advisors in ministries was also one outcome from that project. And it was suggested already maybe 2012 or something like that. Now we saw it was implemented fully in 2016, and now they are already working. And we hope good progress in that direction. So that is one thing. Then another thing which I was thinking is in which way to give advice. And I am very much fond of evolutionary economics here. What it means? It means you should create diversity first. To create knowledge base between people which we share, and to show there are very different ways how to move. And then to give some advice how to select between these different kinds of, but not to select yourself, but to show that if you follow these and these principles, that selection would be the best. But don't select yourself. And that is, I think, very important to create diversity at first. Not to go first to that is the best option, please go for that. So that is, maybe it seems very self-evident, but sometimes it's not. And that is, I think, another important lesson. Then another point is policy learning in that process and creation of partners. That is, again, if you use user-driven innovation, demand-driven innovation, then it's very important to create demanding users. And that is very important in our field. We should develop more demanding government, more demanding ministries, more demanding officials, and not to be afraid of that. It helps, actually, if we have more demanding people in that side of the table. And it was even here, I think today was one slide which mentioned, don't expect all government officials not to know the case. There could be very good people, specialists also in that side of the table. So that's another thing. And then is another point which I would say is talk and persuade logic. So that is communication. Talk and persuade, and you should spend a lot of time on that. And in long run, it may give very, very positive results. Now, I finish now here.
Thank you very much. Sorry about the breakage. Now, the other gentlemen, do you have any thoughts that these presentations have brought to you? Maybe Robert Jan first. Then.
No, I think it was a really very inspiring presentation. I have a question to Kevin, because you gave some very nice examples that you said, take the assessment of these projects. In Vietnam, I think Indonesia, you said it's very difficult to be there harsh with regard to these projects. Yet, if you are an expert who has to look at proposals for a grant, you say yes or no. If you do review for a scientific paper to be published, you say yes or no. So why don't you not do then hard no with regards to finished projects? I think we have as peers to be quite open with each other, and that's, I think, the strength of the science community, is to have a debate and dialogue, and to also point out when things are not good or not going well. So, but you felt uncomfortable with that purely because of future funding and things like that?
I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. I absolutely agree that we need to be transparent, and if something's not going well, we need to make that known. But I think there is also a cultural element that could cause something that we as scientists and as decision makers, politicians and administrators could cause something that those people would regard as being entirely appropriate and lead to an action which we think is right. In some cultures, it would lead to a complete collapse of a whole set of projects or a whole set of ideas that would not be to the benefit of anybody, and not really to the what those people that would simply say this can't go on would actually want. And I think certainly Europe, and I guess the Western tradition, is one of, I guess, calling a spade, as some of us say. But in many other cultures, if you do that, you actually could lead to situations where individuals could get personally harmed. And I actually felt in a case like that it would be better to find a way forward and to change the way things were being done rather than risk nothing being done. And I guess that's the context of that particular example. I in no way was trying to hide the reality, and that has been published in the literature. But if we had gone to politicians in that particular case and said, this isn't working, if we'd gone to a funding agency and saying, look, it's all rubbish, then I think the overall outcome a number of years down the track would be much worse.
Now, I asked the question because what we see very often, of course, in organizations like, for instance, the European Commission and a program like Horizon 2020, if I would ask all my program managers about the success of the projects, everyone says, all our projects were successful. And so there is no failure because no one wants to manage a portfolio of projects which are a failure. Yet at the same time, we all know that we deal with science and with research, where per definition things will fail. And we should not be afraid of identifying these things then. And that makes it, I think, also quite often difficult for program managers, but also policymakers to decide to stop certain programs and to start new ones. And therefore, I think being a bit more critical between ourselves, like we are in the call for proposals when we are receiving zillions of proposals and we have to make rough decisions about what we're going to fund, also with regard to success and non-success. But I think fully right, Kevin, this should not lead then to unnecessary or collateral damage, because that's something not appropriate and which we certainly not like to see.
Right. Now, I have a question about the Estonian science advice system, where you have these advisors in the ministries, but they are paid by the Research Council. Is the Research Council also appointing them, or is it done in collaboration with the ministry? Because I could imagine that a bunch of civil servants in a ministry might look a bit skewed at somebody who comes from the outside and is supposedly a wise guy or a girl being a scientist. And could easily create some friction within the...
First of all, we put this criteria, but this person have to have a PhD either or for at least 4 years experience in science, in research. We do finance these positions, actually co-finance, but we do not intervene into the procedure of hiring people. But in the very final stage, once the ministries have already selected the people, we ask for CV to make sure that they do have such experience as we have required. But the ministries are responsible for finding people, hiring them, and everything.
Good. Now I would invite questions or comments from the audience, because you've been sitting very diligently and listening. Now, anything that has aroused your interest? Mart Saarma, please.
I would a little bit argue with Robert Jan. At least in the last assessment of the ERC, about 10 or 15% of the projects were considered failed, though the remaining 85 were considered very good or extremely good, which also looks a little bit suspicious to me. But there was at least 10 to 15% of failures, which I think is a good trend.
No, exactly, Mart. That I also led that with big interest, and I think it's great that the ERC went through this critical process. But having for frontier research, where you are going to fund the most risky projects, a success rate of 85%, I don't buy that.
Yeah, isn't it true that many funding agencies have been sort of blamed for being too conservative and risk-wary? So they give the money to very established scientists to the detriment of young upcoming scientists who don't have a very long CV yet and really would deserve an opportunity also. Does this apply, in your opinion, to research funding at the European level and also at the national level?
Perhaps a few words of the European level, and Mart can also confirm for the ERC. We are extremely proud that each year around 45% are newcomers. And that means that the money does not only go to the happy few. And I think that is quite important.
Yeah.
We have also dedicated calls, and notably in the ERC for the early stage researchers, so to give them a chance to compete between themselves and not just to compete with the more established researchers. So for us, having newcomers in the game is extremely important. We will never compromise on excellence. We always go for the best of the best, but we should really allow many of these brilliant young talents to also benefit from the subsidies and for the support schemes we have. So this reaching out and finding pockets of excellence, encouraging young scientists to apply, is exactly something which is very high on our agenda, because we don't want to become an old boys or old girls network. That would be killing for the system.
Well, I'm glad that you have heeded the advice or the saying of Max Planck, who was frustrated by this favoring of established scientists. And he said that science progresses through funerals. Any further comments from the audience? Please.
I'd like to follow this up by pointing out that also, let's say, in many national research councils, major efforts are made to boost careers of young researchers, including the Dutch National Research Council, who had these personal grant schemes already quite a while ago, also basically preparing the scientific community in the Netherlands for the competition on a pan-European level. So I think there is a best practice developing here. Also for cost, the European Association for Cooperation in Science and Technology, one of its 3 strategic priorities is to promote career development of young scientists. So I think a major effort is going along this way.
Very good. Now I have a question about academies, who are now playing a major role in the European system, as we heard, and also nationally. But academies of science are very different in different countries. Some are huge organizations that run big research institutes, research performing organizations, whereas most, I think, are merit-based collections of top scientists. And now the SAPEA and also Akadeemia Europea that's involved with SAPEA, you must have experience on very different academies trying to contribute to this effort. Have you any thoughts on their sort of willingness, for one thing, if they are old-style academies that have monthly meetings where old gentlemen sit and talk, are they really ready to get involved in these activities? And should the European structures somehow try to give maybe science advice to academies and not only governments, how to deal with these issues?
I think also here it's a matter of union and diversity. It's also a matter of developing best practice in a common mission. I think it's very important to realize that we have a landscape where we have to have alignment between what's going on a national level, and we need pan-European instruments. That's the same in the research funding itself. European Commission does a great job in Horizon, but at the same time we have also, of course, national funding agencies, and we need them both. And again, there has to be coordination and there has to be best practice, and that best practice is basically something that everybody can observe and everybody can learn from that. I think networking is key, and one of the basic merits of SAPEA is not only, let's say, the mechanism itself and the cooperation with the group of chief scientific advisors and the assembly unit, but also that it is leading to enhanced synergy between the academies themselves. So it is really paying off also in that sense. And I think this is a process going on in many aspects. And what we learned here today and yesterday is all part of this process. So it pays off also in terms of issues like narrowing the participation gaps, narrowing the divides in terms of innovation on the pan-European level. And it also demonstrates that essentially the difference between what is called basic research and applied research is not that big. I just noticed that Robert Jan was speaking about frontier research. And I think that's a key thing to make the match. And Mart was right. I think high risk, high gain means basically that one should not be too much shocked if you have some failures, because you learn from that.
Right.
Kari, your question about the cooperation between the academies. When we were developing the strategic advice mechanism at European level, we had to make a choice. Are we going to create for the whole evidence gathering, again, all kinds of expert groups, or are we going to tap into the national academies? And we decided to go for the national academies and the European federations of academies, and there are 4, but actually there are not only 4, there are many more, but the 4 are of course the most important ones. And that was quite a challenge also for these European associations of academies to get to learn each other and also to express their willingness to cooperate. And the fact that the European Commission put 6 million euro available helped a little bit to bring the different parties around the table. But I see as enormous advantages also for the academies that now you know also in what countries they are working on what topics. Because issues like the future of work or an economy based on renewables or questions related to migration, they are issues which play in all European countries. And it is of course important that we know at national level what the different academies are working on. But also it leads to a lot of transparency with regard to where are the top experts on these topics. So now, thanks to SAPE and the cooperation between the academies, we can identify the pool of experts all over Europe who are really leading experts on these topics. So I think having this partnership with the academies is learning by doing, but it functions extremely well. And again, I'm very grateful for the leaders of the academies who really were willing to set this up. And I think it functions quite well. But Janusz, you are a member of the high-level group. You have to also express your point of view.
Yes, so I second what you said about the role of academies, and I'm also grateful for the academies, for the leaders of the associations of academies, and also for academy members who have been absolutely essential for the development of our opinions, because we based our opinions on the evidence reviews prepared with the help of the academies and with members of the academies among the experts. Now, concerning the relationship between national academies and the pan-European associations of academies, one reflection I have after listening to the presentations from the national level is that I think that the national academies, especially from the countries where the system of science advice is not so well developed, have a lot to learn from the countries where the academies have taken initiative with the policymakers to start doing something. I know that in some of the regions of Europe there are academies or learned societies that would be willing to be a part of the larger network and are willing to be invited more often to give advice at the pan-European level. But my reflection is that maybe they should actually start working at home and asking other academies that have been already successful, how did they do it? If they were successful, and start implementing this on a small scale at home, because I'm sure that as you said, if there is evidence that some country is working already on some aspect that is of pan-European relevance, sooner or later the experts working on this on the national level will be invited to share their achievements on the European level.
Thank you. Since you've been thanking the academies for their contribution, I think we should thank the Commission for for the trust and expectation that they have put on the academies to sort of get more active and competent in science advice. And I think that in the long term, that's going to be an important aspect of this. I think the times are quite favorable for promoting this area, because right now, Tarmo Soomere, our the president of the Estonian Academy, is at the Riigikogu, the Estonian Parliament, giving advice, and I have to leave right after this session to get to Helsinki, because at 4 o'clock I will be speaking at the Finnish Parliament on science diplomacy. So it's the times are favorable for this activity.
May I ask a question, because we had an amazing presentation by Jorge who had the press, and where is he sitting? Because I don't see him.
He's over there.
Okay. I was really extremely impressed, and I think all of us were extremely impressed, because this was an outstanding presentation. My question is, in this whole endeavor which you have, this courageous endeavor, did you get support from the European academies? Because I think in such situations it is important that the academies support each other. And this is a very nice example where you do courageous work to make the case for a solid scientific foundation for a major project which would have enormous impact on your environment and on your ecosystem. And in such situations, there needs to be solidarity between the academies. So that's why my question is, did you get support from the European academies or from others? You mentioned ICSU, which I'm very happy that ICSU indeed supported you. But was there enough interface and support for you?
No. Yeah, but we didn't approach the European academies. The way we did it was we wrote to the IAP, which was headed at the moment by a German from the Leopoldina. And the way they approached that was that this was probably going to be better attended through the regional network, which was IANAS. So they deferred to IANAS, but they also provide some help. So we didn't contact specifically the Europeans, but I have to say that we did get many scientists coming from Europe. So we got people from Germany, from France, Spain, and other countries in Europe. And this was very useful. So the contribution from partner academies and partner organizations throughout the world was fundamental for us to be running this appropriately, also with funding. Although funding wasn't the major issue here, because it didn't require a lot of money. It was mostly, bringing scientists, and we in Nicaragua were providing the local logistics. So money was not really the issue, specifically because scientists in generally, they don't charge for coming and addressing these questions. If we had to pay for that, then it would be a lot of money. But the scientists that were involved, they were doing that pro bono. So that was very good. But it would be nice to have more direct contacts with the Europeans. Specifically, we would like a lot of help, probably through science advice. You have this very well organized in Europe, and I think Latin America in general could benefit from those experiences. I know there's some workshops and some things happening, but since the experience in Europe is more advanced, we could actually benefit even more from that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I think that the Nicaraguan experience is not the only one, because authoritarian governments anywhere often try to suppress scientific evidence. It's, for example, in the cradle of democracy, the words climate change were erased from all paperwork of the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States of America under the current authoritarian government. And I think scientists have to defend science, and also ICSU, of course, has as one of its principles the freedom and responsibility of science, and they certainly are looking what is happening in the world and trying to keep the integrity and the freedom of science on the agenda. Okay, we are running out of time, but one more comment. Here.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Yes. So I just wanted to share one positive example, actually, of cooperation between the academies. As I mentioned last year, we had this theme about the Białowieża forest and the protection of the Białowieża forest. And we have prepared a number of conferences. One conference was an international conference. We have reached out to our neighboring academies and received a lot of support. So we have representatives from the Swedish Academy, from Czech Academy, Slovak Academy, German Academy, and from Belarus, of course, as well, as we are sharing the Białowieża forest. And this conference was a success. Eventually, the Białowieża forest is not locked down anymore. You've probably heard about that. So I just wanted to say that there is this positive example of cooperation of the academies that is influencing also the decision makers. And I just wanted to extend also the invitation to Nicaragua to always reach out to us, to European academies, whenever you are in need of researchers from our area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now it is time for me to thank the presenters and the panel members and speakers and the active audience for listening to these excellent presentations.